You can build the best website in the world, but if nobody can get to your website, it's sort of useless. Deploying websites can be a little bit tricky, but fortunately there are some cool tools out there to help you automate Azure. Let's mash on that. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. Today we're going to take a look at a tool that I'm pronouncing Pulumi. That seems like a reasonable pronunciation.
I'm not sure how else you would pronounce it.
Well, there's like a cloud umlaut thing here over the U, so I don't know if you pronounce that with an umlaut or a cloud umlaut. Anyway, let me give you guys some background here on what this is, first of all. So many years ago, I always like to start with these history things. When people were building resources in Azure, it was really like mouse driven, and you go and you click a bunch of buttons and then you'd have a resource group. Well, sometimes there weren't even resource groups back in the good old days. But as time progressed, people came up with some better ideas around that, and ARM templates were created. And ARM templates are a whole big file that will define for you what your environment is going to look like. So you can say in it, like, please set up a web server and a storage account and any stuff that you need inside of it. And so time continued, and it was sort of discovered that ARM templates were really verbose and difficult to use. So on top of that, there's a lot of different clouds out there, right? So the knowledge behind ARM templates is really specific to Azure clouds. AWS have their own language, and GCI have their own language. So a company called HashiCorp that you might know from Vagrant came up with a tool called Terraform, which allows you to build out these templates that can be used. Well, I guess using the same DSL, you can build templates for Azure, for AWS, for a bunch of different cloud providers out there. And everybody was happy for a while. And then time continued, and we realized that building these templates in this sort of domain-specific language that was based on YAML was a little bit restrictive, because sometimes you needed to like repeat an action for a bunch of stuff, and loops were difficult to do. And so this brand new startup called Pulumi Umlaut Cloud came out, and this is their offering. So this is still pretty early days for them. They're on version 0.17. But their approach is to provide you a code-based approach to building out these templates, basically. So let's take a poke and see what that looks like here. I'm going to dismiss this warning about 64-bit code. I don't know why I would need to be able to address that much memory in Visual Studio Code, but there we go. So I have gone and installed two different things here to get Pulumi to work. So the first one is the Azure command line. So like the Azure CLI, people who are familiar with Azure will have used this a bunch of times before, but it's basically this AZ command. And you can install on any platform. It's built in Python, I think. So I updated to the latest of that, which is 2061. And then the second thing I did was I installed Pulumi itself. Now, the installation for this is a little bit rough still. So it involves taking this string here and just pasting it into a command window, which is obviously not something that we want to encourage people to do. Do not just paste random bits of code from the internet into a command window and hope that it doesn't format your machine.
Especially with that execution policy bypass flag on there.
So I'm sure that, yeah, a little bit sketchy. I'm hoping that this is just because it's a really early version and they're going to move to something a little bit more robust later. I was hoping that it would also exist in Chocolatey, but it's not there yet. So maybe that's something that will keep coming here. So anyway, I got this tool installed and it added itself to the path eventually, and everything was good. So let's go and create a brand new Pulumi project here. So I mentioned that this is done actually in code. So you have a couple of different choices. You can use Python, Go, or JavaScript, TypeScript to build your project. I don't know Go, and my Python is pretty atrocious, so I'm going to stick to JavaScript, which I know a little bit. So we'll run this Pulumi tool and give it new, and then we have to give the name of the template that we want to use, which in our case is going to be Azure type. Here we go. So it's going to ask us a bunch of different questions here about what we want to do. So the project name, let's just call it Pulumi Demo 1. The description of it, so this would be kind of what your project is doing. So I don't know, let's do something on ACI today. Right, and we need a stack name for this. So
ACI stands for?
Azure Container Instances. So we'll call this the same thing, so we'll call it ACI. And it's going to ask us which Azure environment to use, public, US government, China, or Germany. That's why I see Germany is a different one, but go for it. Especially because this is China, the country, and this is German, the language or the people, maybe. There's a wide thing.
Interesting.
So this is going to go off and build and install a bunch of stuff here. And it's going to just set us up a default stack to look at. So that is contained in this index.ts file here. So I'm going to, it wants to know, do we want to deploy this stack right now? So I'm going to say no right off the bat, and we'll come back in. All right. So we get in here, and right away, there's a bunch of errors here, which are just TS-lint errors, and many of them are ridiculous. Comments must start with a lower letter. Super oppressive in my mind. So I'm going to add a more sane TS-lint configuration file here. TS-lint.json. And I'm totally not going to type this, but one that I prepared earlier, which should make everything a little bit more sane. Okay, so now we have this set up here. This is just standard TypeScript code. And what it's going to do is it's going to build us a resource group. It's going to create a resource inside that group, which in this case is just a storage account. And then it's going to export the connection string for that resource group at the end. So this will be available in our environment later. So let's add a new thing here, and we're going to add an Azure Container Instance. So if you haven't used ACI, it's this cool sort of like serverless Kubernetes, serverless Docker solution, which you can use inside of AKS, the Azure Kubernetes services. But basically, it's just a really quick way to stand up a container without too much ceremony around it, and you don't have to like set up a virtual machine and then host the container on that. It just does everything for you. So to do that, we're going to start off by just declaring a new one. So const container is a new, and we get this nice completion here. So it's an azure.containerservices.group, and then we give it a name here, which is going to be Nginx. I think we'll just install an Nginx container on this because it makes it pretty easy to demo. And right away, you can start seeing that we're in the red here. So the problem here is that we need to provide at least 2 arguments. And so let's go give it a configuration here. And again, we've got some nice red here telling us that we've messed up. So this is really nice to have this sort of completion here. So we start off with a resource group name. And notice I had tab completion on that. I'm going to give it the resource group name that was created up here. So I can do resource group dot name. And then we need a location for it, and we want that to be the same location as our resource group, which is West US. But instead of copying the string, I can just do resource group location again. So it allows me to reference back to these things. I mean, this is not new. This existed in ARM templates, exists in Terraform, but this level of like tab completion sort of stuff is really, really nice. So OS type is Linux. And we will define a series of containers on here too. Containers is going to be an array. And now you can see we've got everything that we need to stop the red, but we're going to define a container in here. So we're going to start with a name. And because we're not very creative, we need to give it an image. So this is the name of the container, like from the container registry that we're going to use. So Nginx. Give some memory, say 1 GB memory. We'll give it a CPU. We can have one of those units of CPU. And then we're going to define some ports for it here. So this is a web server, so we'll give it an external port of 80. And at least until HTTP 3 comes along, we can give it a protocol of TCP. There we go. So that has defined our entire container. And let's go and run the suggested Pulumi up. See what we get. So it's going to do a nice little preview for us and tell us what it is that it's going to deploy out to the environment. And again, this is nothing new. Like this exists in Terraform, it exists in ARM templates, it exists in CloudFormation, but we'll let this go. Okay, there we go. So it is going to create this new stack, which is sort of like you can think of it as just like a deployment basic. So this is going to be like the group of resources that you move throughout. So you could create multiple resource groups as part of this deployment, but we're only going to create one. So we're going to create a resource group. We're going to create that storage account that was defined up here already in the template for us. And we're going to create this container service group called Nginx. So let's go and just let it do that. So that'll take a minute. So it's calling out using whatever complicated APIs that exist in the background to do this. So while this is going, I am going to point out some of the interesting differences here between, say, Terraform and Pulumi. So Terraform, when you build a Terraform template and when you deploy it, it needs to write its state somewhere. And there's a bunch of different providers that you can write the state to. So by default, it just writes to your local machine, but you can have it write to S3 storage or a bucket somewhere in Azure. But this is just an important place to keep the configuration. So Terraform knows when it goes to redeploy what stuff has already been deployed and what stuff it needs to deploy. So that's a little bit of work to set up. I mean, especially if you've got a bunch of people on your team, you need to make sure that they're all pointing at the same configuration source. So the way that Pulumi have done it is they have changed it around a little bit, and they have put that information actually in here. So they have an API service that they call out to, and they write information to it. So you can see this is the Pulumi demo here that we have going up, and we can drill into that here, and it will give us kind of information about the deployment that we ran. So we ran this update 1 a minute ago. These are the resources that it deployed. I don't know what this button does. Let's see. Ooh, makes a graph. That's cool.
Ooh, fancy.
Yeah, I mean, already this is awesome. It doesn't, you can't drag and drop the nodes though, so that's a little upsetting, but you can go and delete it in here if you need to. So this means that I can deploy it on my laptop and on my desktop and all of these places without having to worry about sharing state. And equally, different people on my team can do deployments without worrying about the state.
And you get the nice auditability there of being able to see all the activity that happened.
Yeah. So this thing has finished, took 1 minute and 17 seconds. That's that connection string. And if you remember, that was also over here too, the connection string. So let's drop into Azure and see what got built. So it built this really annoyingly named resource group here. And within it is the Nginx and the storage instance. So let's go and change this resource group name, because I don't like this resource group name. So that is as simple as going up here and doing name. And we can give this as a resource group name. Now, the other thing that would really be useful for me to know is what is the IP address of this container instance that I just built. So what I can do is I can export that information too. I'll just paste that in there. So this comes from the container here, this container reference here, and we're just going to get the IP address on it. And there's a few different things off of it you can get, but IP address is what we're looking for right now. And then I will redeploy this. So it's going to go off again. It's going to take a look at what's deployed out there by querying against API, and I would assume querying against Azure itself to see what's actually up there. So this is what it's going to do, and I'll just start it off. background while we're doing this. So it's going to go off and it's going to replace the resource group, and it's going to replace the storage. It's going to replace the Nginx. And the reason that it's doing this is because you can't just rename resource groups inside of Azure. So it's being forced to recreate all the instances up there. But this is fine. Like, this is what we want to have, is all of our infrastructure as code so that we can make these sorts of big changes with ease. So it's been really nice to have this sort of thing, because traditionally, if you named a resource group wrong when you created a bunch of resources in it, well, you hooped. Now you've just got to have a wrong named resource group from this point forward. So it has already gone and it said it's replaced the resource group and it's replaced the storage. So if we come back in here, back to our resource groups and refresh it and see what we got here. So there's still this one here, so it must still be working on deleting that in the background. And then here it's gone and created this new resource group. It's starting to set up things in there. Let's see how it's doing here. So it's still working on creating that replacement. It'll just take a few more seconds for it to allocate a container instance for us. And then over in here, go back to this stack, we can see that update 2 started a minute ago. We can drill into the details on that one and take a look at what's changed with it. So it's easy for us to go back and see like a list of everything that's changed. We can get much more details on it too.
Very cool.
Let's see. All right, so it has gone, it's deleted original, deleting the original. So if we go back over here, I bet you that we'll start to see this resource group losing resources here. Yeah, so it's empty and it's
it says
deleting. So that just leaves us here with this instance. So we just need to wait a few more seconds to see what the output is. I don't know if it's available over here yet. Whatever crashed browser tab I have. All right, I don't know what happened to that tab. But
so
there we go. So we got an IP address out of that. So let's just go and copy that IP address, shove that up in here, and see what we get. Oh, there's our Nginx container.
Awesome. So do you know how like this autocomplete stuff is really cool? When you're working in TypeScript there, do you know how complete that is in terms of like all the different resource types in Azure?
I don't know. I suspect it's probably pretty good. Like if we drill into this and do new Azure, there's a lot of stuff in here. Obviously Azure is always changing,
yeah.
But it's got a lot of the new stuff. Like SignalR is a fairly new service.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of stuff in here.
It does look pretty complete from that perspective, at least. That's cool. Very neat.
So the only caveat that I have around just going and using this is that it is not free.
There's the catch.
Yeah, which I mean can be good, can be bad. I had a real hard time finding the pricing on this thing. Try and find it. The pricing. I have to go to plumi.com. So for an individual user, it's free. But if you're going to be doing a team where you have multiple people being able to do deployments and that sort of thing, then there is a cost associated with it. Now, that being said, your deployments should probably be running through some sort of CI/CD pipeline anyway. So in that scenario, you might be able to get away with the free version. I feel like this might be worth some money. It is a good tool. I don't know if it is worth like $50 a month. That feels expensive to me, but then I'm super cheap.
What's a stack for?
Oh, right. So a stack is like this thing that we deployed is a stack. So I don't know. I guess if you were going to move this through 3 environments, that would probably count as 3 stacks.
Right.
The nice thing is that this is a full programming language. So we can do like if whatever, and then just take these sections out. So you can put your logic in this thing itself and pass in command line stuff. So you could say like if like there's a e dot I don't know is equal to prod, then do this different stuff here. Like this is where you get your configuration from. So you could do all of your stuff within this one template. But then I don't know, like, because it integrates with the sort of like backend storage, I think it would look really weird because you'd have all these updates and you wouldn't know which environment they'd go into. So you're probably better off setting up separate stacks for each one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover on this.
Well, thanks for that, Simon.
Anytime. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And remember to like, comment, share, retweet, reblog, Instagram, whatever one does on that, and WhatsApp your friends about all of this stuff. Basically, just send a woof. And we'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, let's stop recording. I hope that was recording. Stop recording.